kind of break it into chunks, right? So, and this is the same for both dwelling and homeowners. Dwelling is a little bit easier only because there's only the three forms, right? So for dwelling, you only have 1, 2, and 3, right? This first box here, you have the basic, the broad, and the special, right? So for dwelling, it's a DP1, DP2, and DP3. That's your basic, your broad, and your special. Your basic and your broad are on a named peril basis, right? And what that means is that it follows the basic perils. For broad, it means it follows the broad perils. And then the special form means that it's going to cover everything except if it's excluded, right? Now that is the same for both dwelling and homeowners. Basic and broad are on a named peril basis, and then the special form is on an open peril basis. Now, when you get to homeowners, you're going to add on. That can get confusing, right? Because you're adding on so many other forms. What I recommend you do is break them down into chunks, right? So your 1, 2, and 3 remain the same, right? But instead of it being a DP 1, 2, and 3, now it's HO 1, 2, and 3, right? HO for homeowners. But same concept, right? Your basic and your broad are on a named peril basis. It's going to cover the basic perils, going to cover the broad perils, going to cover everything. For the HO3, it's going to cover everything except what's excluded. Now, when we add on that HO5, you want to group together your HO3 and your HO5. Those are the two open peril forms, right? So your HO3 is your special form, your HO5 is the comprehensive form. The difference between an HO3 and an HO5 is that HO3 is open on the building, but it's named on the personal property. HO5, again, being the comprehensive form, that means that it's an open peril basis on both the building, but also on the personal property. So meaning on the personal property, whereas on an HO3, it's going to follow the named peril basis on the broad perils. On an HO5, that personal property is on an open peril basis. So it'll cover everything except what's excluded. So that's the difference between an HO3 and an HO5, but they're your only two open peril forms. Now we have a 4, 6, and 8. Those are your even numbers, right? 3 and 5 are your two odd numbers. So 4, 6, and 8. A good way to remember those is rent is a 4-letter word, right? So HO4 is for renters. That is for personal property coverage for renters. So HO4 is for your renters. HO6, a good way to remember that is condos is a 6-letter word. So HO6 is for your condominium coverage. Very similar concept to an HO4, that is for personal property coverage of the condominium owner. A condominium coverage is a little bit more complex than an HO4 in that it also provides coverage for anything interior. So a good way to think about HO6 coverage is think anything from the drywall in. So that could be wall-to-wall carpeting, any appliances, anything from interior walls in. It doesn't cover anything exterior. It doesn't cover the building itself, nothing exterior. And then an HO8, that is for your older Victorian homes. A good way to think about that is there's a couple ways. So one way you could think 8 is dated, that kind of rhymes. Another way people have thought about it is you can say 8 is the older sibling, right? That's the oldest form. So 8 is the oldest one. That is for older Victorian homes. So it's typically homes that are built before 1950. So that is your HO8. So again, these are your even numbers. Group those together. These are your odd numbers, 3 and 5. These are your only two open peril forms. And then your 1, 2, and 3, that remains exactly the same for a dwelling and a homeowners. That's your basic, broad, and special. And basic, broad, and special, that kind of you'll see throughout the other sections as well. You'll see that in commercial. You'll see that in business owners a little bit too, a version of that. So basic, broad, and special, you'll kind of just, become familiar with that as you continue reading. But the other ones, again, best advice is to kind of memorize it into chunks. The rest of this slide here, is kind of breaking down, again, the difference between an HO3 and an HO5. This is telling you that an HO3 is covering the building coverage on an open peril basis, personal property on the named peril basis. Another way they might word that is by saying coverage A versus coverage C, right? Coverage A being the building, coverage C being personal property. So it's saying the same thing. They're just giving you the coverages as far as letters. And then same concept here with the HO5. Down here at the bottom, this is telling you how the forms, the cause of loss forms, are reimbursed. So again, best advice is to always put it into little categories, right? Put it into little chunks. So the two forms that are covered on an actual cash value basis are your HO1 and your HO8. So 1 and 8 are both on an ACV basis, actual cash value. So any questions that say, Johnny has an HO8 form, which of the following is true regarding his coverage? Will his reimbursement be paid on a replacement cost basis, actual cash value, stated value, et cetera, et cetera? The moment you see it's an HO8 or an HO1, you know it's going to be on an actual cash value basis. So that's for your HO1 and HO8. For replacement cost, 2, 3, and 5. So same concept. Any questions around an HO1, or I'm sorry, HO2, HO3, and HO5, those are all on a replacement cost basis. Now, let me add here too. This is also for dwelling policies as well. So if you have any questions around a DP1 or a DP2 or a DP3, same concept. It would be replacement cost if it's a DP2 or DP3. If it's an DP1, it would be on an ACV basis. So easy way to think about that is 1 and 8, ACV, 2, 3, 5, replacement cost. And then 4 and 6, which is your renters and your condominium, those are on a stated value. So again, that's the personal property coverage of either the renter or the condominium owner. And again, that reimbursement is on a stated value basis.